Everyone has an angel, a guardian who watches over us. We can't know what form they'll take. One day an old man, the next day a little girl.
Check, 1, 2.
But don't let appearances fool you. They can be as fierce as any dragon. Yet they're not here to fight our battles, but to whisper from our hearts, reminding
Do
that...
you mind?
I'm sorry?
I am preparing to do a movie review here and you're not helping. You are very distracting.
I'm just doing the opening narration from the film.
I'm about to narrate my hand upside your head if you don't shut the fuck up.
Jeez, I'm just doing my job.
Well, go do it somewhere else.
Fine.
Hard to find good health these days. Welcome to Cinematic Excrement. Quite a few of you were asking for this one. Sucker Punch.
Originally released in 2011, Sucker Punch comes to us from the mind of Zack Snyder, director of 300, Watchmen, and the soon-to-be-released Man of Steel. In addition to directing, this is Snyder's first and thus far only film for which he also wrote the story. It's about a girl, played by Emily Browning, who is struggling to escape an insane asylum after being wrongfully institutionalized by her abusive stepfather. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, imagine taking that story and then injecting it up to the eyeballs with powerful hallucinogens. You see, our main character, referred to as Baby Doll, we never learn her real name, copes with her harsh reality by retreating into a fantasy world, so nearly the entire movie is a series of dream sequences, as well as a flashback. Of sorts. It's a tough movie to explain, and clearly I'm not the only one who had trouble figuring this one out. While the film does have a small fan base, it was dismissed by the majority of critics and the movie-going public, and failed to make back even half its production budget domestically at the box office.
For what it's worth, upon my first viewing of Sucker Punch, I immediately dismissed it as a visually impressive but otherwise confusing and often boring mess of a movie. Now think about that for a second. This movie features several elaborate action sequences which are chock full of guns, swords, martial arts, explosions, and scantily clad women. And I was bored. That should not be possible.
However, I decided to give this movie a second look for two reasons. One, because many of my viewers requested it, and two, because this film now has an extended cut. Originally, the goal was to release this movie with a PG-13 rating, presumably to maximize the target audience, because movie studios are still under the delusion that this actually works.
Do I really need to bring up Conan the Destroyer again?
Getting that PG-13 rating was easier said than done. Snyder had to recut and resubmit the film at least 5 times, accounts vary on the exact number, before the MPAA would grant him the rating he wanted. As a result, several scenes were heavily edited or cut altogether. The extended cut restores almost 20 minutes of footage, and rather than release it unrated, which is typical of many home video releases nowadays, this cut was submitted to the MPAA and carries an R rating. I'm not really sure why, as it's not particularly gory, it doesn't feature any actual nudity, any sex is implied rather than shown, and the language isn't all that vulgar. Oddly enough, the UK's BBFC, which has historically been a bit overzealous when it comes to censorship, gave Sucker Punch a 12A rating without any cuts. Go figure.
So, now that we have access to the director's intended version of the film, how does it hold up? Well, probably not too well, or it wouldn't be on my show, but let's take a look.
Our story begins in 1960s Vermont, where Baby Doll's mother has just passed away due to complications from... illness. Her stepfather seems unnervingly cool with all of this, until he reads his late wife's will and discovers she left everything to her 2 daughters. He doesn't take it well, and in a drunken rage, he attempts to take his anger out on the girls. But Baby Doll grabs her stepfather's gun and fights back. This is one of the first differences we see between the 2 cuts of the film. In the theatrical cut, she fires only 1 shot. In the extended cut, she fires 2, the second of which grazes the stepfather's arm. So if you saw the theatrical cut and wondered why he was holding his arm while Baby Doll ran into the closet, now you know. Unfortunately, one of the shots inadvertently hits and kills Baby Doll's sister, which leads to her stepfather committing her to an insane asylum. I really don't have anything bad to say about this. The slow motion may be a bit overdone, but apart from that, it's a very powerful and well-shot scene that does a fine job of setting up the film. It also features a rather haunting rendition of Sweet Dreams, sung by Emily Browning herself, and the woman has a damn good voice. But in spite of its strong start, the film starts to fall apart pretty quickly afterwards. Baby doll arrives at the asylum, and the evil stepfather works out a deal with the head orderly, played by Oscar Isaac, to have his stepdaughter lobotomized before she can tell the police what really led to her sister's death.
I'm taking a really big risk here. So it's gonna have to be $2,000 even.
What the hell are you talking about? Don't try and cheat me. We had a deal.
Listen,
I'm standing
Father.
right here.
I'm not gonna tell you what to do. Clearly you're a man that can take care of himself.
I'm 3 feet in front of you.
This girl. And frankly, I don't want to know. But what are you gonna tell the detectives when they come snooping around? I'm sure they're gonna love to get her side of the story.
I can hear every word you're saying.
Now, here's the other thing. I don't have a doctor on staff who does lobotomies.
What?
But there just happens to be one scheduled to come in. He'll be here in 5 days, so I'll just forge his signature.
I'm
up on the person.
traumatized, not deaf! Baby doll's next 5 days in the asylum pass by rather quickly, and even though she clearly overheard the orderly and her stepfather plotting to lobotomize her, she never tells anyone. She even has regular sessions with the asylum's resident psychiatrist, Dr. Gorski, played by Carla Gugino, and she never brings this up. You'd think that would be worth mentioning, especially since they have to forge her signature to get the lobotomy approved. But no, she never brings it up, and that magical day finally comes. She's strapped to the chair, the doctor positions the spike, raises the hammer, and...
Stop! Get that thing away from me. Get it away from me! And shut off that damn music!
This is where it gets weird.
From what I can gather, in the last few seconds before the doctor brings the hammer down, Baby doll's life in the asylum flashes before her eyes, but not as it actually happened. Instead, as a sort of coping mechanism, her mind creates a dream world that mirrors the real world. In this dream world, the asylum becomes a brothel, her stepfather becomes a priest, the orderly becomes a pimp named Blue Jones, which is an awesome pimp name, by the way. Dr. Gorski becomes Madame Gorski, the inmates become the whores, and the cook becomes... the cook. I guess Baby doll's imagination ran out of ideas. Almost the entire movie from this point onward is basically a dream sequence.
And since I recently reviewed Breaking Dawn Part 2, I'm sure you'll understand why I'm not very high on dream sequences right now. But I'm trying to keep an open mind. Promise.
This is another moment where the theatrical and extended cuts differ. In the dream world, the priest has brought Baby doll to the brothel from the orphanage, where her services are scheduled to be sold to a man simply known as the High Roller. In the theatrical cut, Blue says the High Roller plans to do some flower picking, implying his plan is to take Baby doll's virginity. In the extended cut, however...
Don't tell me. The priest brought you here from the orphanage to lose your virginity, right? Oh, let me rephrase that. To sell it.
Subtlety be damned, we're gonna spell it out.
This certainly clears things up a bit, but I have to wonder if it was really necessary. Sometimes subtlety can be more effective than overtness. Anyway, Baby doll is introduced to several of her fellow inmates/whores. Sweet Pea, her sister Rocket, Amber, and Blondie, played respectively by Abby Cornish, Jenna Malone, Jamie Chung, and Vanessa Hudgens. Yes, Vanessa Hudgens' character is called Blondie. And she's a brunette.
That's the joke.
After Rocket gives Baby doll the 50-cent tour of the establishment, we are treated to a musical number from Blue and Madame Gorski to the tune of Roxy Music's Love is the Drug, which didn't exist in the 1960s, but most of the music in this movie is anachronistic, so at least they're consistent in that regard. This number was featured in the ending credits of the theatrical cut, but it's been restored to its rightful place in the extended version. As far as the plot is concerned, it's not really necessary, so I kind of understand why it was cut. But I'm glad it was reinserted into the film as it serves two purposes. One, it gives us a day-in-the-life view of the brothel, and two, its various and elaborate dance numbers and rapidly changing set pieces clearly illustrate that this does not exist in reality. Also, it is catchy as all hell. Unnecessary or not, this is my favorite part of the movie, which sadly means it's all downhill from here. The next day, we see some of the girls doing their daily chores. Baby Doll is cleaning the floor, and Rocket is working in the kitchen, while wearing skimpy outfits and high heels. I know they're working in a brothel, but you'd think Blue could have provided them with a set of halfway decent work attire. Generally, these outfits and shoes are not conducive to manual labor unless you're filming a porno. Speaking of sex, the cook catches Rocket trying to steal from the kitchen, and then attempts to have his way with her. Fortunately, Baby Doll shows up to save the day. In addition to shortening the scene in the theatrical cut to make it a bit less disturbing, they also edited out this line from the cook.
Just have a little fun.
Classy guy.
From here, we go to the dance rehearsal where Madame Gorsky decides to size up Baby Doll by doing her best impression of Rosa Klebb.
You seem fit enough.
He seems fit enough.
As every girl in the brothel is required to learn and perform a dance number, Madame Gorsky plays some music and asks Baby Doll to show her what she can do. So with all the girls and Blue watching, Baby Doll begins to dance, and the camera zooms in on her face, and... what?
And this is where it gets weird. Every time Baby Doll dances, we never actually see her dance. Instead, her already fragile mind retreats even deeper into insanity and creates an even more bizarre fantasy world.
A dream within a dream.
Yes, I am well aware that pretty much every single person who has ever reviewed this movie has made an Inception reference. I apologize for nothing.
In this fantasy sequence, she finds herself at some kind of ancient Japanese temple where she meets a wise old, not Japanese man played by Scott Glenn. We'll be seeing a lot more of him. He provides Baby Doll with a sword and a gun with which to defend herself, and tells her she'll need to gather 5 things to escape her captors: a map, fire, a knife, a key, and a 5th mystery item.
Oh, and one more thing. Defend yourself.
Baby Doll then finds herself accosted by 3 10-foot-tall samurai, one armed with a sword, one with a polearm, and one with a rocket launcher and a minigun.
This must be what going mad feels like.
Well, she's dead.
No, actually, she's fine and dandy, because in this universe, she's friggin' Wonder Woman. And that brings me to another problem I have with this movie. This fight sequence is boring. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to look at, the sets are beautiful, the enemies are awesome, if a bit over the top, and the special effects are extremely well done. The fight choreography is decent, though there's definitely room for improvement. Baby Doll often seems to flip through the air purely for the sake of flipping through the air, and it gets a little silly. But the fighting is not what makes it boring. It's boring because this scene has absolutely zero tension. Remember, none of this is actually happening. She's not really here. She's back in the brothel dancing, which is generally not a life-threatening exercise. But of course, the brothel isn't actually real either. That's a dream too. The real world is still back in the asylum. So how does what we're seeing in these dream sequences translate to the real world? Fuck if I know, we never see it. And not because it was cut from the film, it was left out intentionally. Snyder deliberately made pretty much the entire plot of this movie ambiguous.
Now, I'm not opposed to leaving certain things up to audience interpretation, but if I have to fill in so many gaps in the story on my own that I'm starting to think I deserve to share a writing credit, you are doing it wrong.